Hey, Joe Gilder here from Home Studio Corner. It's time for the big reveal. In the last video, I shared two clips with you, identical clips with one difference. And I asked you to leave a comment guessing what the difference was. Got a lot of submissions and I'm gonna reveal the answer in just a second. But in case you missed that video, I'm gonna play the clips for you again right now.
I know I can hear you. I know you can hear me. All of this noise and no one is listening. I know I can hear you. I know you can hear me. All of this noise and no one is listening.
Now, as you can imagine, I got guesses all over the map. Some folks thought there was no difference at all. Some folks thought that there was limiting, multiband compression, stereo widening, all sorts of stuff. There was even one comment who would go through and tell people if they thought Mix 2 sounded better, that they were wrong. Mix 2 was completely oversaturated and sounded horrible. Mix 1 sounded infinitely better. Well, what's the answer? A handful of people guessed correctly, and here's the answer. Clip number 2 was 1 dB louder. That's it. They were identical, except for clip 1 was a little bit quieter than clip 2, by 1 decibel exactly. Now, I totally get this is a lame experiment. I've been on the receiving end of it, and I had a lot of the same answers you did. I thought it sounded more full, more low end, more brightness, more clarity. There was some sort of mix bus processing happening. I get it. Our ears and our brains are fickle little beasts, and they hear lots of things that may or may not actually be there. So what's the point of all this? Well, part of it is I want you to get more experienced at critical listening, and that was a little part of it. But there are two main lessons here. There's actually one lesson and one warning from this that I want to talk about really quickly. First off, the lesson. Volume matters. I talk all the time, especially lately here on my channel, about getting the balances right before you start reaching for your favorite EQs and compressors and whatever else you like to mess with. Getting the balance right will help you get the rest of it right. If it's out of balance, if the volumes aren't right, you've heard 1 decibel of volume, granted it was over the entire mix, can make a huge difference in how you perceive things. I've told this story a lot. There are many times where I'm working on a mix and the bass track just isn't right. And so I start doing lots of things with EQ, lots of things with compression, only to find out it was really the volume that was the problem. It was too loud or too quiet. And by removing all the plugins and just getting the volume right, spending 30 seconds to get it in that right spot, everything came together, and then it just took maybe a little EQ and a little compression to get it to sit exactly where it needed to sit. So if 1 decibel of volume change over an entire mix can cause people to hear all sorts of different things, then it stands to reason that we should spend a good amount of our focus on getting the individual levels and balances right before we jump into all the fun stuff. Okay, that's the lesson. On to the warning. Beware of choosing louder over better. The problem with the fact that our ears tend to perceive things that are louder as sounding better is that sometimes we can choose the louder one when it actually doesn't sound better if you take everything into account and you were to level match the two. For example, I worked at Sweetwater years ago, and there were lots of manufacturers that would come in and set up their speakers, for example, and they would do a shootout between their speakers and the competition. And one of the things they would try to do is make their speakers just a little bit louder than the competition's, which would in turn make us perceive them as being better, because we tend to think louder is better. The problem, of course, is a lot of the Sweetwater folks were onto them and said, hey, can you make sure these are level matched before we do the test? Which completely just flustered them. It was great. Let me give you 3 examples of where loudness can hurt you. Number 1, mixing at really loud volumes. It's fun to crank up the mix and just have the walls shaking. Problem is, it tends to cover up all the problems in the mix because you're just hearing big boomy low end and nice bright top end, but you're not actually hearing the problems because the louder thing just feels and sounds better. Also, your ears start to do this limiting thing. Once you listen at loud volumes for a certain amount of time, your ears actually change the way they listen, which will make it sound even better to you when in reality the mix isn't working very well. Solution, you should certainly check your mix at loud volumes, but pick a volume that's more sane to do the bulk of your mixing, because you're going to hear things more accurately and you're not going to make rash decisions based on listening to something at a super loud level. Example number 2, compressor makeup gain. This one's really easy to do. If you're compressing something, let's say a lead vocal, and you start to get this really aggressive compressed sound, and then you turn up the makeup gain on your compressor so that the vocal is overall louder than it was before, you may think, hey, that vocal sounds better. And it sounds louder, and you can hear it better, but you might not have the right compression settings, and it might actually sound worse even though it's louder. That's why I always teach, as much as you can, set that makeup gain to where when you bypass that compressor, whatever you're compressing is roughly the same volume before and after. Now, don't obsess over that and get it to the exact right amount. Just getting it close is better than nothing. Then you can hear, okay, I can hear the changes. Yeah, it actually sounds better before. Case in point, I was doing a critique for someone recently, and it was more of a bluegrass type tune, minimal instrumentation, all acoustic instruments, and he had put compressors on just about everything, and I could hear it. I could hear the compressor here, the compressor here. It was just too much compression. I said, just take them off. And he redid the mix with minimal, almost no compression. It sounded 10 times better, and there was no compression there. The problem was he put a compressor on something and most likely made it sound louder, which in his ears made it sound better. That's why you need to be careful with compressors. Sometimes you don't need compression at all, and sometimes compressing it too much and then adding volume will make you think it's better when it's actually not. Number 3, the big obvious one, don't master your songs too loudly. It's easy to take this example that I've played for you and say, see, this is why my masters need to be louder than everyone else's, because they will sound better. Yes, you want your masters to be loud. You don't want them to be 10 dB quieter than all the other music people are listening to, or it will sound inferior. But you don't want to make it so loud that you start slapping it down with the limiter so much that it completely sucks the life out of the music. Ian Shepherd talks about this all the time. You should check out his course and all that on mastering. But in general, you want loud enough to where the limiter is doing something, but not so loud that the limiter is really clamping down. Remember, the difference in volume that you heard in these two examples, there was no change in the limiting. It was a completely mastered file, and just the overall volume was changed by 1 decibel. Changing the amount of volume going into a limiter will dramatically affect how that limiter sounds, and most of the time will make it sound worse the louder it gets. So find a good volume where there's a little bit of limiting, a decent amount of limiting, but not too much limiting. That way your master will be nice and loud, but it'll still retain dynamics and feel and punch and all those good words that we want our mixes to have. Final point, if you guessed completely wrong, don't beat yourself up. It was an unfair test to give you anyway. I would have probably guessed a lot of the same things you did. Just go forward and be aware of how volume affects your mixes. And if you haven't already gotten my 5-step mix guide, it will change your mixes. It's a quick read, and you'll have better mixes by the weekend just by following the simple steps laid out there. Go to 5stepmix.com to get that for free. All right, that's it for me. See ya.